Hey everybody, Thomas Joseph here, and today we are tackling the Napoleon, or the millefeuille. Just the name in and of itself sounds intimidating, but this dessert is amazing, and it's really easy to do, so let me show you how. Today I'm using store-bought puff pastry, and this is a really great, convenient product to have on hand to make desserts just like this. So this is one 14-ounce package of puff pastry dough. This is sold in the freezer section, so you should store it in your freezer until you're ready to use it. Give yourself a little bit of time because this does need to thaw out, and it's best to thaw it in your refrigerator overnight. And I'm just gonna lift this off the parchment paper, and I need to roll this out into a 11 by 15 inch rectangle. This is a little shy of that, but that's okay because we're gonna roll this in some sugar. And what the sugar is gonna do is it's gonna give this puff pastry a really beautiful kind of sparkly, crusty exterior. That's really gonna make this Napoleon a showstopper. And I like to really just kind of use my hand and brush it right on the surface of the puff pastry, and then flip this over, coat the other side with sugar. This is kind of a similar technique. We've made cheese straws together a few times, and this technique of kind of rolling the puff pastry in cheese or in sugar is really great because it adds a lot of wonderful flavor. The sugar is going to caramelize, but it also adds a wonderful kind of browning effect to the puff pastry as well. So just using a standard rolling pin, roll this out ever so slightly to 11 by 15 inches. So we're at about 14 and a half. This is just shy of 11. So a little bit more this way. You want to work quickly because you don't want this to heat up too much. Puff pastry, it puffs up because it has layers and layers of butter in between layers and layers of dough. And what happens in the oven is all of those layers of butter, they melt, they create steam. The steam leavens the dough, and ultimately when it bakes up and gets nice and crisp, you have all these lofty layers. So this really is kind of a magical dough, and it's so fantastic that this is available in so many supermarkets. So if you find that you've rolled your dough out a little too thin, all you need to do is take the ruler, anything with a straight edge, and you can kind of push it back into its shape. And this really also helps in creating a nice, perfect rectangle like I have here. Now what I need to do is I need to cut this into 3 equal portions. And since we rolled this out to 15 inches in length, I'm going to cut this into 3 portions that are 5 inches wide. I'm using a pizza wheel here. You could use a pastry cutter. Take your ruler, just switch it the other way, and cut each of these into 11 by 5 inch rectangles. Now, again, this needs to go and get chilled nicely so that it bakes up, it puffs up beautifully. So I'm gonna just transfer this back to my parchment lined cookie sheet here. And this should go right into the freezer 10 to 15 minutes until it's really, really nice and firm, and then we'll be ready to bake this. All right, so now it's time to make the pastry cream. So 2 cups of whole milk right into a saucepan. I'm gonna turn this on medium heat, 1/4 cup of granulated sugar. Now, in total, you'll need 1/2 cup of sugar for this recipe. The other portion is going into our egg yolk mixture. I'm gonna add a little pinch of salt. Again, salt is very important whenever you're baking. Give this a little bit of a gentle stir. I'm also going to add some vanilla bean to this milk mixture. Make sure that the vanilla bean is nice and soft and supple. It shouldn't be dry or brittle. That means that the vanilla bean is old, it hasn't been stored properly, and it's dried out. So take a paring knife, and what you're gonna do is cut lengthwise down the vanilla bean, and then using the back of the paring knife, apply pressure to the cut end of the pod and scrape all of those little tiny seeds right out of the vanilla bean pod, and this goes into the milk mixture. As I've mentioned before, you can take this vanilla bean pod and place it in a canister of sugar and just let it sit for a few weeks. You can even leave it in there, for a really long time. It's gonna get really hard and brittle, but it's gonna infuse your sugar with wonderful flavor, and then you don't even have to use vanilla really in your recipe. So I'm gonna put this off to the side and dunk it in some sugar for later use. So whisk this together. It's already starting to kind of come up to a steam here. We don't want to boil this, but we want it to come up to temperature and just have kind of little bubbles around the edge of the pan. Let's start on the egg portion. So a large bowl, actually this is kind of like a medium-sized bowl, 4 egg yolks right into the base of the bowl. I have 1/4 cup of cornstarch. Now cornstarch is the thickening agent for our pastry cream. This is going to give us nice structure to our pastry cream, which is gonna help support all of the layers of the puff pastries. So whisk the cornstarch and egg yolks together, add in another 1/4 cup of granulated sugar. This is gonna be dry and kind of crumbly, but once we temper in the hot milk, all of these kind of lumps and crumbly bits will really kind of melt down into the hot liquid. Our milk mixture is just starting to bubble, and now we're gonna add the coffee component to this pastry cream, and that is instant espresso powder. You can find this at most supermarkets, 2 tablespoons that I'm gonna add into the milk mixture. Just whisk this together. I'm actually gonna turn off the heat. We don't need to cook this any longer. And the reason why I'm using espresso powder is because much different than if you just use regular ground coffee. It really adds this complexity that really flavors this pastry cream nicely. So buy a bottle of instant espresso powder, because adding a little bit of it to your favorite chocolate cake recipe will make your chocolate cake seem even more chocolatey. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but coffee really helps intensify chocolate flavor notes. So this looks great. Now it's time to temper. So tempering, it's really a simple technique. It scares most people. I don't really know why, but all you need to do is you need to bring the temperatures of each of these components closer together. Essentially, this egg yolk mixture, it's at room temperature. Our milk mixture is very hot, so we need to bring this guy up in temperature just a little bit. And tempering is adding a tiny bit of hot liquid to your yolks a little at a time. So I'm just gonna gently kind of stream in this hot milk espresso mixture a little at a time. And then what you can do, take this mixture now that it's all combined, and this goes right back into the pot. I'm gonna turn the heat back on, and this now needs to get cooked until it's nice and thick. We actually now wanna bring this up to a boil. And you can see the bubbles kind of forming and popping. Whisk this constantly for about a minute. Now use the whisk to your advantage and push it into the corners of the pan, because oftentimes when you're making pastry cream like this, the corners of the pan is typically where the mixture starts burning. So really kind of make sure that you're scraping up the bottom of the pan where that direct heat is so it doesn't scorch or burn. This pastry cream looks great. I'm gonna turn the heat off, strain this through a fine mesh sieve. And the final step in making this pastry cream is to enrich it with a little bit of butter. Now, butter adds really fantastic shine to the pastry cream. It's gonna make it nice and glossy, but it also adds structure, because as the butter cools in the mixture, it will solidify and create a nice thick pastry cream in the end. This straining process, this is just to kind of fish out if you had any egg whites mixed in with your yolks, or if there are any little clumps of cornstarch. 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter. This is at room temperature. Just mix this until all the butter is melted and this is nice and evenly combined, and this goes right into the refrigerator. Take a little bit of plastic wrap and put it directly on the surface of the pastry cream so it doesn't form a skin. Chill until it's nice and firm, and that'll take a few hours. All right, so our puff pastry layers, they're out of the freezer. You can see how well chilled they are. They're really rigid. So I have an oven preheated at 400 degrees with the rack in the middle of the oven. Whenever you're refrigerating doughs, whether it be a cookie dough, a pie dough, or even puff pastry, switch out the trays, because this tray is so icy cold. What it's gonna do is it's gonna cool down your oven, and it's also going to keep the bottom layer of dough really cold, where the top is actually going to get the direct heat, and so you're gonna get uneven baking. So take the well-chilled dough, slide it onto a new cookie sheet that's essentially at room temperature. So this way, only the dough is cold, and this will cook up nice and evenly. Take a wire rack, invert it over the top of the rimmed baking sheet like this. As the puff pastry rises, some areas are gonna puff unevenly, but it will all be evened out because this cooling rack is going to kind of help even out the puff pastry as it rises. Into the oven, 400 degrees for about 25 to 30 minutes until the puff pastry is really golden, slightly caramelized, and pretty puffy. Puff pastry layers are out of the oven and they've cooled nicely. You can see how the sugar really helps to create a nice golden brown color to the top of the pastry. The coffee pastry cream is very chilled and nicely set. I have 3/4 of a cup of heavy cream that's been whipped to soft peaks, and we're gonna lighten up our pastry cream. We wanna lighten it just ever so slightly so that it's lighter in texture, but it also has enough structure. So what we like to do whenever you're lightening pastry cream or anything like this with whipped cream is fold in a portion of the whipped cream first. And you can fold this in pretty vigorously because what we're doing here is lightening the base of the pastry cream. So just really stir this together. It's gonna look like a mess to start, but this really does help in the end in creating a really nice, even, silky, beautiful pastry cream for the Napoleon. And now fold in the rest of the whipped cream. You can do this in stages, but there's really not a whole lot of whipped cream here, so I'm just gonna add it all in and fold this together. If you wanted to flavor this in a different way, you could infuse that wonderful milk mixture with some orange zest, with some spice if you wanted cinnamon. Really, there are endless possibilities when it comes to the flavoring of the pastry cream, whatever you prefer. Push this pastry cream off to the side and we are gonna start assembling. Now, with the 3 pieces of puff pastry, try to pick the one that is, I would say, the most attractive and has the most even layer to it for the top of your Napoleon, and that's this guy here. So I'm gonna put this off to the side. Let's use this guy as the base, only because he has a little bit of a chip here on the top, and that will be our middle layer. So take half of the espresso pastry cream and set it right in the center of your puff pastry piece. Gently coax the pastry out to the sides of the pastry. You don't want to go fully to the edge because we're going to layer this, and the weight of the middle layer and the top layer is going to push the filling out towards the sides. Sandwich the next layer. You can give it a gentle press. Another layer of our wonderful espresso pastry cream. And then the last layer right on top. And you want to make sure that this is pretty even because we're going to put something over the surface now on top of here, a little decorative edge. Now, if you wanted to just keep it as is, you could certainly dust the top here with confectioner sugar. I'm going to embellish the top with a little bit of a glaze. This is a mixture of confectioner sugar, a little bit of heavy cream, and some espresso powder, so it's an espresso glaze. Spread a nice even layer right over the top of the Napoleon. Take an offset spatula and coax the glaze towards the sides. A good tip here is you can always add, but it's really difficult to take away. So I'm gonna use a little bit more of this glaze on top because it's a little too thin and it's not spreading to the sides. Gently push towards the edges of the Napoleon. For the final touch, I'm gonna show you guys a technique that's typically used on Napoleons. It's called feathering. And while the glaze is still hot, if you take a little bit of melted chocolate, I'm using dark chocolate here, you're gonna run some lines of chocolate across the surface of this glaze. This is a number 2 round tip that we're using here, but you could certainly just use a regular pastry bag. If you just kind of clip off a tiny little portion of the end, you should be able to do this as well. Take the chocolate, exert a little bit of pressure, and create some long lines down the length of the Napoleon. I'm using one hand to guide, as you can see, so that I get somewhat of a straight line. And you can space these out maybe about 1 inch apart. Really depends on how detailed you want your feathering to be. Take a skewer, it can even be a toothpick, and what you're gonna do is you're gonna draw lines. So you're gonna, every inch or so, pull through the glaze and the chocolate, and this creates this feathering technique. Now, I'll go through and I'll do it one way, 1 inch apart. Try to wipe the tip of the skewer clean so that you get a nice kind of draw through this glaze. And this is kind of fun. This is like the crafty part of baking. So have fun with this. You don't have to take it too seriously. As this glaze sets, it will even out. So if you see any kind of bubbles or gaps, will fill in. To give it even more dimension, I'm gonna go the opposite way. And that's just, again, drawing the toothpick in one direction, wiping it clean, and you have a really interesting design on the top of your Napoleon. Give this a few taps to even out the glaze. Now, if you're gonna serve this to your friends and family, I would encourage you to put it into the refrigerator just to let it firm up a little bit for 20 to 30 minutes, and then you'll get nice clean slices. But this is really an impressive dessert, and I hope you give it a try. As always, reach out to us using the hashtag Kitchen Conundrums. We love to hear from you guys. Enjoy. And as always, guys, click like and subscribe.